It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Kamaal Anas.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to thank the organizers, Master Control, for inviting me here. I'd like to speak with you today about the effective design and implementation of quality management systems with a focus on reducing the cost of poor quality. And I feel like this topic fits in very well with what Craig was just speaking about in the different ways that you can improve quality and continuously improve, and I hope this fits in very well with it. And so I've included the executive summary here, and it's really the same executive summary that's within your agenda and conference guide. And I'm not going to read through it, but I put it here just in the off chance that one day you might actually come back to this presentation. But I've developed a non-executive summary, and I probably mislabeled this one. This should probably be the executive summary because, as you know, most executives like bullet points. They don't want big words. They want things to be very simple and have a lot of symbols and things of that nature. So this is probably the executive summary. But really, you know, I keep hearing this over and over again. And not only do I work for IAVI, but I also do consulting here and there throughout the industry, biotech and pharmaceutical. And I constantly hear that quality has a high cost. And I'm sure you all have heard this, you know, why do we have to do this? You've heard it from the execs who already know the answer, and they keep talking about, you know, the cost of quality is too high, the cost of quality is too high. But I always counter this with the cost of poor quality is much higher than the cost of quality. And we're going to go into that a little bit later on. But as we all know, you know, quality management systems are required for compliance. You have to have them. And again, you know, I'm in biotech and pharmaceutical, very highly regulated industries. And as such, I'm going to try to incorporate some examples from these two industries, but I think they cross industries. I know we have some folks from food industries here. We have some folks from the automotive industry in different places. So I think these are kind of universal things that we can go through. Another thing is that a compliant quality management system is not always an efficient or an effective quality management system. And conversely, an efficient or effective quality management system isn't always compliant. But usually if you've put the thought into making your quality management system efficient and effective, it will be compliant. But one of the things to take home, and if you don't take home anything from this talk, I'd like you to take home this, is that quality management systems aren't just a tool for compliance. It's not just something so that if FDA comes in, you know, you can check off the box and, hey, we've never had a 483 filing. Really, I think quality management systems are the key to running your business the right way. It's the key for your management to get the data that they need to make sure that they make decisions. Because we've all seen managers who shoot from the hip, who make gut decisions, and if they had the data and if they were provided with the right data, they'd make the right decisions. And lastly, use quality management systems to force your management to make decisions. A lot of times, quality is not driven from the top down. So as quality people, as persons who are involved in either operations or quality, it's important that we manage upwards, that we force this change upwards. So I'd like to go a little bit into the industry background. And I had a friend, or I have a friend, he has 2 brothers. And in his household, his mom was very strict. And he always had to be polite with his brothers. And so whenever he would get upset, he had this prayer for them that was in all actuality a curse. He would say, I hope that you go to heaven very quickly. So instead of saying drop dead, he'd say, may you go to heaven very quickly. And we have 3 Chinese prayers here that may actually be curses as well. May you live in interesting times. Which talks about, you know, it could be that, hey, don't want you to be bored, but on the flip side, it could be, may you be in times that aren't stable. May you come to the attention of those in authority. So in some ways, people might think, hey, you know, my boss saw me, I'm good. But on the flip side, sometimes you don't want that attention. And thirdly, may you find what you're looking for. And I think we all know the flip sides of those. But as an industry background, may you live in interesting times. I think, you know, at least in the biotech and pharma world, we live in very interesting times. We see a loss of intellectual property rights. It's a big deal right now within the industry. We see declining R&D productivity and product pipelines. Pipelines are going away. Companies don't know what to do. They're very worried about this. You can see it with all the mergers and acquisitions going on, people buying up biotechs just on the very small hope that a drug might come out of it. We see increased spending pressures on R&D and manufacturing. Again, you've all heard it. We've got to get costs low. We have to get productivity up. And usually there aren't a lot of solutions there. It's just get it done. We have increased complexity and compliance. I know in biologics, things are only getting more and more difficult as we can see things smaller and smaller, biomarkers, all these different things come up, and things are just getting more and more complicated and complex. The science is is advancing rapidly. We're able to do more things with it, and so when FDA sees this, they say, "Oh, go ahead and apply that." And so things are just getting tougher, and again, pipelines are going down, profits are going down, and everything else. We see increased competition, which, from an economics point of view is great. We see India, we see China, we see different countries, the BRIC countries coming into things. But what does that do? That makes the pressures on us even tougher. And then, so the bottom line of this slide is that requirements are increasing and profits are decreasing. So we do live in interesting times. And we talk about quality having a high cost, and so really what do a lot of management teams do in response to this? So with regards to facilities and equipment, they delay upgrades and improvement projects, they delay new purchases, they reduce preventive maintenance, they lengthen validation periods, they have hiring freezes for personnel, they stop training, they reduce reductions in force, they lay people off, they outsource to places that you might not be sure of the quality of what they're doing. Instead of win-win relationships with suppliers and vendors, they start to squeeze those suppliers and vendors. They try to go to the lowest cost provider, even if the quality isn't where you need it to be. And of course, my favorite is the rallying cries of do more with less and work smarter, not harder. And it's not very inspiring when they do this and they don't give you any way to really take care of that. And so a lot of times what happens, and I'm sure you've all seen this, if not with your companies, then with hopefully with your competitors, but instead of trimming fat, the cuts often reach to the bone. And so what happens? Those senior managers, they find what they're looking for. So in the short term, they get their profits. They get their bonuses, they get their stock options, the stock price goes up or is maintained, they get their yearly bonus. But what they also get are some unintended consequences, which really boils down to having an insufficient infrastructure to maintain and sustain minimum quality standards. And so with every reaction, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And so may you come to the attention of those in authority. And so this really is the heart of what we're talking about. Poor quality has a very, very high cost. So I've got two examples here, and I left the names of these companies out because really I don't want to badmouth anybody's company. I don't want to make anyone feel bad, but I do want to take the opportunity to show that the cost of poor quality is very, very, very high. And so we have a multinational corporation, which is my first example, that's a trusted maker of baby products. You all know them. And in fact, when I was doing my MBA, this was the business case of a company that handled a product tampering case in a very, very positive way. They're the business case example of how you actually handle problems. But they got lost, or they lost their way somewhere, and they recently had recalls and lost market share of $1.5 billion. I know for a fact that they didn't gain that much by making the cuts in quality that they had, but they lost $1.5 billion. 4 OTC products started to show problems, and then it turned out that it was actually systemic. There were a lot more problems that were involved, and 136 million doses of product were recalled. They had a consent decree which cost 200 jobs in Puerto Rico. It's taking $100 million in 4 years to retool their plant. They've got marketing violations on top of their lost market share of $1.5 billion. So the violations are going to cost them about $1.2 billion. And the thing that's scary to anyone who's in charge of operations or quality is that the government has indicted, and there's a case against their VP of operations and their VP of quality. So if you're not worried about the company's cost, you ought to be worried about your own cost. And so on top of that, the CEO departed in February, and then the head of OTC left in April. Manufacturing issues continue to undermine their earnings, and they hired a new CEO whose biggest job is not to increase market share and increase stock price and drive growth. It's to fix the problems that were caused by not investing in quality. And then the second case that I have, you're all familiar with the recent issues that have happened with a compounding pharmacy. If you read through the media hype, and you look at some of the comments that their customers and former employees were saying, they were saying that these are good people. They would constantly come in and say people's lives are at risk. We have to do a good job. I honestly believe that they were probably had good intentions and wanted to do the right thing. But we all saw what happened. Over 16 people dead, over 200 people sick, approximately 14,000 people at risk because of contaminated products. They recalled all their products, and then they temporarily suspended their operations, and then the FDA came in and started inspecting. The owner surrendered his pharmacy license, and what we just found out last night is that the FDA and federal officials raided their headquarters. So again, when we talk about poor quality, that's a pretty high cost. And so you've all probably seen this graphic before. The cost of poor quality, when management looks at things, they see inspection, scrap, warranty, sorting, reprocessing, rework, all those sorts of things. But they don't see a lot of the unintended consequences, setup fees, scheduling conflicts, time value of money, customer loyalty, loss of morale. Losing good quality people, the guys that you've trained and brought up through the ranks and made sure that they're good. When they see that things are going bad, what happens when you have a good quality group? The first thing that happens when things start to go bad is your quality people leave. That's a sign I've seen over and over again, is the first people to know when things are happening, it's the quality guys, and when they start to leave, it's a pretty bad sign. And so one of the things that I submit is that the problems that we have are not rocket science. If you look at the top FDA observations for 2011, and you flip through this list, there's nothing on here that's rocket science. It's not that you're having very technical problems with your products or anything like that. The top 10 inspection of observations are things like CAPA, not having CAPA adequately established, not having procedures developed, not having results adequately documented, not verifying results, not performing quality audits, not establishing quality procedures, not having design control. None of this is rocket science. Any second-year quality associate knows all of these things. But it still turns out that these are the things that FDA keeps finding over and over and over and over again. And my favorite is management with executive responsibility has not ensured that an adequate and effective quality management system has been fully implemented and maintained at all levels of the organization. Because in the end, it always goes back to management. And so these are the types of things that we keep seeing. And so one of the things that I firmly believe is that in the long run, any company that consistently delivers high quality products is always going to have an advantage over its competitors. Maybe not in the short term, but they certainly will in the long term. And so what does that mean? That means having the appropriate quality management systems, making sure that you have management review and CAPA systems that are very, very solid and robust, using compliance frameworks, using quality risk management, and using quality by design, and all the other tools that Craig spoke about and the things that you've learned throughout this week. And management with executive responsibility has to support quality and compliance. They have to do it philosophically, so they have to say the words, but they have to follow up those words with the deeds, making sure that they make those improvements, that they invest in quality, that they invest in new equipment, that they invest in training people, that they do all of those different things, that they put their money where their mouth is. And operations and quality has their job to do as well. The thing that we have to do, we're the people on the front lines. We're the people seeing the tactical things that are happening on the ground. What we have to do is then ensure that we provide all the information to management that they need to make decisions. And all of your quality systems and everything that you're doing to develop your quality systems, in my mind, show up in two different places: in the management review process and in your CAPA, which is part of the management review process. And so all of your SOPs, all of your work documents, all of your test results, everything like that, you usually don't see all of that. When management's looking at things, they look at the bottom line and they look at management review data. So it's imperative that we as quality personnel take that, and operations people, take that information and give it to them. And so I'm not going to read out the requirements for management review, but for those of you who aren't familiar with management review, what management review is it's a tool where you look at all of the different, you summarize all the different things that are happening within your quality system, and you present them to management, either quarterly, once a year, twice a year, whatever the frequency is that is most appropriate for your organization. And a typical management review meeting consists of inputs and outputs. Inputs being what is management seeing, and then the outputs being what does management actually do with that information. And I've highlighted 4 of the top in blue because these are where I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, which is the results of audits, customer feedback, process performance and product conformity, and the status of preventive and corrective actions. So if we take a step back and we look at drug development, everyone knows that when you're developing a drug, you don't start from the beginning, you start from the end. You look at what is the indication of the product going to be. Marketing gives you an indication, and from there you develop your whole product development portfolio. Sorry, not portfolio, your product development plan. So you take the end and you work backwards. And I think this is very important because a lot of you are implementing master control for the first time. I've done it twice. I've helped do it at Meridian Life Science, and I've now done it at the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. And a lot of times when you're developing a company from small to big, you grow very fast and you're putting systems in place. Sometimes you put them in place because you just have to have them. You don't always think it through, and it's only once your company matures that you start thinking, how does all this tie together? And so what I submit to you is that as you're developing your quality systems, you really need to think about these 4 inputs. How do you set up your quality systems so that you get the right information to management about audits? Do you just say, hey, we had 5 audits and everything's okay? Or do you say that these are the 5 different audits that we had this quarter? They were broken down by this customer group. We saw this many deviations. Some of them were in this group, in this product line. Some of them were there. Some of them were systemic. How do you actually get that information out of your quality system? And that's a tough thing to do because you have the information, but how do you easily get it out of your quality system into the management review process where you don't spend 3 months trying to figure out all the data that you've got? And again, that's where master control can help. If you can think about this ahead of time, what is the information that you want to get out of your quality system, then you could design that into what you're doing with master control or just general quality systems development and make sure that it comes out. Make sure I've got time. Customer feedback is the same way. How are you getting this feedback? Is it the sales guys who are just saying, yeah, everything looks great, I saw 10 customers and they're very positive? Are you going out? Are you surveying your customers? Are you surveying the people that you wanted to be your customers but perhaps didn't get those customers? How are you taking that data? How are you analyzing it? And how are you presenting it to management? And how are you doing that in a rapid way so that the information is timely? I mean, all those are tough things, but when you've got an electronic solution, it becomes a lot easier. And the same goes for process and performance conformity and all of the rest. I talked just a little bit about CAPA because it's an interesting case study about what we did at Meridian Life Science. And sorry, probably some of the Meridian guys ought to come up here and talk about this. But when we were implementing master control, gosh, I think it was in 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. There weren't all the cool modules that you have now. I remember it was like forms and documents and a couple other modules, and we didn't even have all of them. But we were very creative in the way that we applied things. And one of the big areas that we went after at Meridian Life Science in Memphis was kappa, because we had a lot of deviations. They were piling up. We weren't sure what was going on. We were just trying to improve our processes. And so we actually did that. And one of the really neat things that happened is after we implemented master control, Craig talked about change control and making sure that you put that one peg in, climb up a few more feet, put the next peg in. And really that's what we did. We started, the first thing was basically to get everyone on board with, hey, it's okay to have a deviation. You're not going to get fired unless you do the same exact thing 6 times, over the next month. But you actually get people to start reporting your deviations. And then what happens, management gets freaked out because you've got this huge spike in deviations, and they're wondering, what's happened. And, that's where quality has to step in and say, look, these things have been happening. No one's just been reporting them. And the end result will be the same whether we're reporting them or whether we're not reporting them. You're going to have quality problems later on down the road. But the nice thing that happened when we were over there was that as we started addressing the deviations, and as we started addressing them with sincerity, not just putting something in place so that when the regulators came in, they saw corrective or preventive action, what we started to see is that the deviations eventually started to plateau. And they stayed there for a while. But when we started implementing not just the corrective actions, but when we started putting the preventive actions in place, all the little fires that were happening down here, possibly because maybe only 3 or 4 procedures were wrong, once you had the preventive action of either retraining someone, fixing your procedure, fixing your SOP, doing an investigation into why you had lower yields, once you started doing that, all of a sudden your deviations started to drop off because continuous improvement was working. Let me jump into the case study then. So I'll quickly, I didn't want to make this about IAVI, but I think it might be good, a good case study because we're still building our quality systems. So it might actually be a good case study, not in as much as what we've gotten done, but as you see our infrastructure and what we actually do, you all could be thinking about the different things that you would do if you were in this situation. With respect to putting things into your quality systems. So our mission at the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative is really to ensure the development of a safe and effective prophylactic preventative HIV vaccine. So it's not about treatment, it's about prevention. It's not the treatment that takes $10,000 a year. It's about the 5-cent vaccine that prevents AIDS, because really in the long run, it's our philosophy that you have to come up with a preventive vaccine that everyone has access to. We're a global, not-for-profit organization, and we're a product development partnership. We're one of the first PDPs out there. And one of the reasons for this PDP framework is that private industry tends to have the knowledge, the skills, and abilities to get drugs and vaccines, through the regulatory hurdles and all the manufacturing hurdles of scaling up. But they tend to have no incentive when it comes to a 10-cent per dose vaccine for Africa, India, and China. And the public sector is really good at funding research, especially basic research, but they're not so good at managing development projects. And they also tend to be very nationalistic in scope. And when we look at the UN, they are global and they understand what the issues are, but they're not very flexible with working with other groups. So what the PDPs do, and there are lots of PDPs aside from IAVI, there are PDPs that help solve malaria issues, TB issues, all sorts of other different issues. But PDPs tend to have global knowledge, global skills, global abilities, and they're able to rapidly engage with partners, whether they're government, whether they're private industry, whether they're international agencies, and that's really where we fill in. And this is really a graphic that talks a little bit about drug development. Normally what happens is on the left side of your continuum, you have the NIH and academic organizations that have a very high risk tolerance, but they don't have much money. And so they do a lot of basic research and they start to move into applied research. But after that, they kind of drop off, and you've got this area where biotech kind of fills in, where they have some risk tolerance and some capital, and they kind of fill the gap between large pharma and academics. And large pharma tends to have low risk tolerance, but they do have access to capital and they have great knowledge. What happens with HIV is that you don't have any biotechs actually working in this field, and the cost of development and the risk for pharma is much too high. So what IAVI does is we fill in that area of applied research, preclinical development, clinical development, and move into manufacturing. But our long-term focus is that when we actually get to a phase 3 study that works, we're going to hand it off to a Sanofi, to a GSK, to a Novartis, to one of the big guys who can actually develop hundreds of millions of doses at a time. You know, we won't be able to do that. We know that. We're not going to go into that space. So we actually started out in the mid-90s, and all we were was advocacy. We were just trying to push big pharma. We were trying to push governments into doing more research and spending more money on prophylactic AIDS vaccines. And slowly we developed partnerships, and we started doing clinical trials. And to make a long story short, we've become a biotech, is really what's happened. We have basic research, we have the full gambit. And this only goes through 2008, so it shows a great picture of our funding. We even got a $100 million check from Bill Gates. He was sitting across the table from our CEO. He said, "Seth Berkley, what do you need?" Seth said, "If we ever get to a phase 3, I don't want to have to go around looking for money. I need $100 million to get that phase 3 started immediately." Bill took out his checkbook, wrote a $100 million check, and handed it to him. So we've been very lucky at fundraising. It's been a lot more challenging since 2008, but I think there are challenges when you grow extremely fast, and then there are also challenges when revenue streams start to fall off. And so the role of IAVI, we do still maintain policy advocacy and communications, but we do everything from basic research, and I'll show you some slides on that. We actually do translational research, we do development, we will manufacture products, we'll test them at CROs. We have a very large medical affairs department that works with 10 clinics in Africa, and then a number of other clinics around the world. And then we have a human immunology lab in London that has 10 labs at those clinics. And again, we try to fill in the gaps, as I mentioned earlier. So when it comes to applied research, we have 3 different consortia, because with AIDS, we're still not sure what the correlative protection is for a vaccine. So we have consortia that look at neutralizing antibodies, we have consortia that look at vectors, and then consortia that are looking at live attenuated viral vectors as platforms. We have an innovation fund. So this is a fund that just kind of goes out and says, hey, if you can find a solution to XYZ problem, we'll give you this amount of money. We have a clinical trials network that does clinical trials all over, and we have a design and development lab in Brooklyn with about 40 scientists there doing different types of research. In preclinical development, that same design development lab actually works to advance candidates. We have a human immunology lab, as I mentioned, in London. We have alliances, and then we do a lot of development work. And then on the clinical side, again, we have a lot of different partnerships. Just looking at our clinical research centers, these are the ones that we fund directly. We've got 10 different centers throughout Africa. We collaborate with some in India. We're starting trials in the UK, 2 trials next year in the United Kingdom. We do trials in the United States. We've done about 30 trials to date on AIDS vaccines. And when I show you these pictures, now start to think about how do you develop quality systems to actually cover all the different things that are happening in research. So good research practices. You can make multi-million-dollar mistakes because a scientist doesn't have good documentation. And then when you look at manufacturing, we're manufacturing things, so we have to go to good manufacturing practices. Then we test them in animals, so they have to follow good good laboratory practices. Then we're in the clinic, so we have to follow good clinical practices. And then we take the samples from the clinic, and not only do we do the normal safety testing that you would do, but with vaccines you also have to do immunology research, or immunology testing. And so we have to follow what's called good clinical laboratory practices, which differ from good laboratory practices. So when I'm tasked with making sure that we have quality systems that take care of all the different partnerships that we have, all of the different locations that we have all over the world, you can start to see how making sure that you design your quality systems early to get the information out that you need is very important. Because what happens if we're not sure what's going on at one of our clinical research sites in India, and all of a sudden we've got lots of problems over there, and then a multi-million-dollar trial is invalidated because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So it's quite a tough job, and you can see why we came to Master Control, to try to solve some of these problems. And this is IAVI's footprint. So as I mentioned, there's a design and development lab in Brooklyn. We have headquarters in New York City. We have at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, we have a consortia there. We have our lab in London, and then that lab has satellite labs throughout Africa and India. So a lot of different things going on. We've got to make sure that the quality systems at each one of these places are robust enough to satisfy our donors. And on top of all of that, we've got partners all around the world. And we're funding them and working with them. We don't necessarily have direct quality oversight over them, but we do have to work with them. And that's IAVI. Thank you very much. And of course, all of our work couldn't be done unless we had the generous support of all of our donors. Thank you.